Right, Badram Karnebihi, Shunyama Devaha, Badram Pashyema Akshabihi, Ryajatraha, Stirai Rangai, Tushtuam Sastanobihi, Vashema Devahitai Yadayuhu, Swastinaha Indro, Vridrashavaha, Swastinaha Pusha, Vishwavedaha, Swastinaha Tarksho, Arishtanemihi, Swastino, Bruhaspati, Dadatu, Yo Antaha Pravishya Mamavacha Imam Prashuptam, Sanjiva Yati Akhila Shakti Daraswadamna, Anyam Shtahastacharana Shravanatvagadin Prana Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam Lasatu Srimadananda Tirtendurno Hrudambare Yadvacha Chandrika Swamta Santapam Vinikrintati Padavakya Pramana Jnan Pranamya Shirasa Gurun Vyakarishe Yatabodam Vishnu Tattva Vinirannayam. Okay, good evening. Hope everyone is fine and well. Now that the lockdown is easing. So now that the lockdown is easing, I hope everybody is getting some kind of normality in their lives. So as the life outside gets a little bit easier, our contemplation on the Vedas and the Upanishads is getting more and more interesting. So let's just recapitulate what we were trying to address last week. So last week we spent about an hour and a half thereabouts discussing about what are the Vedas, what is the meaning of the word Veda, why we, the followers of Sanatana Dharma, view Vedas as the supreme source of authority. Then I gave you 3 reasons why Vedas are the supreme source of knowledge. One is Apaurushaya, the other one was Nityatva, and Swataha Pramanya. So we took up Apaurushaya and did some small little online internet experiments to understand how Vedas are not composed by any person, including God himself, and how Vedas are eternal. They've always been in the Supreme's mind, and with every creation, they come out of the Supreme's mind. Now, the sequence in which the Vedas come out with every creation is exactly the same in every creation, like how the material world is also created. And there is a famous Vedic saying, Data yata purvam akalpayat. So he does everything in the same sequence in every creation. And from a Sanatana Dharma perspective, creation has never started at a particular time. That's our view. Creation has always been going on. There is an eternal cycle of creation. There's never been a point where creation happened, and there'll never be a point where creation and destruction will not happen. So the Sanatana Dharma view, the global philosophy of the Vedas, is radically different from other religions, such as the Christian friends, who view creation has happened at a particular point of time, and there is only one creation, and that is a creation from ex nihilo, as it's called. It's creation from nothing. For us, creation is from Mula Prakriti. The Supreme uses the Mula Prakriti, the components of the point of singularity that happens before the Big Bang, which is called as the Mula Prakriti, which is also eternal. The Supreme uses that, the Mula Prakriti, to let it evolve and transform into various components of the universe. And then eventually he takes it back, the expansion and the big crunch. So that is our view of creation, and such is the Vedas. And then we also discussed about how the Vedas are eternal. And then we discussed this rather complicated philosophical concept called Swataha Pramanya, which means that the validity of the knowledge is in the knowledge itself. Yeah. So now that we spent some time talking about why the Vedas are... Sorry, could I request one of our friends to switch off their mic, please, if that's okay, the microphone? Thank you. So, so we discussed how, so once we have had this deliberation about why Vedas are the supreme source of knowledge, then the natural thing to do is actually dive deep into the Vedas itself. Now, over the last 12 weeks, we've had 12 sessions discussing about the Upanishads. Now, the Upanishads themselves are a component of the Vedas. So Upanishads themselves are Vedas. So in that sense, we've actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have done is, we have actually discussed a lot of Vedas already over the last 12 weeks. Now, in that 12 weeks, what we have d we've taken some basic concepts. So we've taken some basic concepts of Vedic philosophy and expanded that with regards to what the Vedas say. So we discussed about the soul, we discussed about how creation happens, we discussed about how the journey of souls happen, what is karma, what is jnana, what is bhakti. So we kind of dwelt on all this. We dealt with all those kind of concepts. So now what we need to do at this point of time is take all those concepts that we have learned over the last 12 weeks and actually apply this into the Vedas itself. So I would say that we have now become eligible to dive into the Vedas because we've had the basic concepts. So this is what we call as adhikari. So we have all now become adhikaris to go and dwell with the Purusha Sukta. Could I please ask people who have not switched off or muted their microphone to do so, please? It's quite disturbing and to keep the sequence going. Thank you. So we now we have all become adhikaris. So we've all become eligible to actually dive into the Vedas because we have understood quite a few concepts. So I have picked up a particular sukta of the Rig Veda for us to essentially contemplate and think about what the Vedas are saying. When I say Vedas, I mean the Samhitas, the Samhita portions of the Vedas. What are they saying? Are they just talking about rituals or are they talking about deep philosophy? Yeah. So let us take up Purusha Sukta as an example. Now, before we go, so Abhijit, next slide, please. So before we go into the Purusha Sukta itself, we need to have some background information as to what happened in Bharatvarsha about 5,000 years ago. Now, Skanda Purana captures this situation quite nicely, and we have dealt with this on a few occasions over the last 3 months. So the Skanda Purana says, Narayanad Vinishpannam Jnanam Krutayuge Sthitam Kinchit Tad Anyata Jatam Tretayam Dwapare Akhilam Gautamasya Rishehe Shapad Jnanetu Ajnanatam Gatehe Sankirna Buddhayo Devaha Brahma Rudra Purassaraha Sharanyam Sharanam Jagmuhu Narayanam Anamayam Tair Vijnapita Karyastu Bhagavan Purushottamaha Avatirno Mahayogi Satyavatyam Parasharat Utsannan Bhagavan Veda Ujjahara Harihi Swayam Chaturda Vyabhajat Tamshta Chatur Vimshatida Punaha Shatada Cha Ekada Chaiva Tataiva Cha Sahasrada Krishno Dvat Dashada Chaiva Punastatta Vittaye Chakara Brahmasutrani Yesham Sutratvam Anjasa Alpaksharam Asandiktam Saravat Vishwatomukam Astobhyam Anavadyam Cha Sutram Sutravido Viduhu. So it goes on. So I just wanted to give this illustration on the first paragraph of this portion in Skanda Purana, essentially historically documenting what happened in Bharatvarsha about 5,500 years ago, when the whole of the Vedic knowledge had been misinterpreted or not being used properly, and the ignorance crept in the human minds. And at the end of the Dwapara Yuga, the ignorance in people's mind was so much. So if you take Kruta Yuga, most people were knowledgeable. In Treta Yuga, that came down by a third. In Dwapara Yuga, it came down by 3/4 of people being ignorant. And then, of course, in Kali Yuga, it's a very small proportion of people who are knowledgeable, and its majority of us are ignorant. So when in the Dwapara Yuga, when there was more and more of ignorance that creeped in, Skanda Purana says Brahma, Rudra, Suparna, and all the Devatas, they all went to approach Vishnu and said, look, on earth, the Vedic knowledge is completely degraded, degenerated. People have forgotten about it. Please, can you do something about it? So at that point, Vishnu himself takes an incarnation as Vedavyasa in Satyavati and Parashara. Parashara was a great rishi, and his wife was a fisherwoman, Satyavati. So he appears in that couple Krishna Dvaipayana or Veda Vyasa. So what he does at that point is to save whatever Vedas that were still available. Ananta vai Vedaha, we have touched upon this before. Vedas themselves are infinite. But by the end of Dwapara Yuga, so much of Vedas were lost. So Veda Vyasa decided, okay, there are lots of ignorant people here. They don't need to know infinite Vedas, but even whatever that is left, if that can be saved and compiled, and that can be used as a material for their spiritual philosophical progression. So that was Veda Vyasa's intention. He did not appear here to bring new Veda. His role was to save and preserve whatever that was existing at that point at the tail end of Dwapara Yuga. So he compiled everything and then he divided them and then he passed it on to his students. Yeah. So we'll see that in the next slide, but this is the historical position as to how Veda Vyasa appeared. And in Gita, as you know, in 1037, Krishna himself says, Muninam aham Vyasaha. So among all the Munis, I am Vyasa himself. Yeah. So we understand by various evidences, both in the Vedas, the Upanishads, the Gita, Bhagavata and so on, that Narayana's incarnation is Veda Vyasa, and he came down on earth to preserve the Vedas. So if we move on to the next slide, so this is the grand view of how the Vedas look like in the 21st century. So when at the end of Dwapara Yuga, there was a portion of the Vedas that were scattered all around Bharatvarsha and they were available. So what Veda Vyasa did was, he brought them all together and then he had 4 Sishyas, he had 4 disciples. They were called Paila, Vaishampayana, Jaimini and Sumantu. You might have heard these rishis' names. So Paila, Vaishampayana, and Jaimini and Sumantu were the 4 immediate disciples of Veda Vyasa. So what Vyasa did was, he compiled all the Vedas and he gave it to his Sishyas. He gave it to the Sishyas and said, please look after these portions of the Vedas. So to Paila, he gave that portions of the Veda called as the Rig Veda. To Vaishampayana, he gave Yajur Veda. And to Jaimini, he gave Sama Veda. And to Sumantu Rishi, he gave Atharva Veda. So then what happened was, these rishis then they created, and then there was the Shaka. Shakas means branches. Branches means the various families that came down from these individual rishis. They started preserving a portion of the Vedas. So for example, there are the 4 main shakas in Veda, in the whole of Vedas, Rig, Yajur, Sama and Atharvana Veda. So these are branches that we need to be clear. Then there was a creation of what is called Upashake. Upashake means sub-branches. So within the Rig Veda, for example, 24 sub-branches were made, and each branch was given to a particular Gotra, a Rishi and his family to look after that portion of the Vedas. So in Rig Veda, there are 24 branches. And in Yajur Veda, this is a little bit interesting, Yajur Veda. So initially when Veda Vyasa compiled, he gave Vaishampayana what is currently called as Krishna Yajur Veda. So he gave him that. So Vaishampayana looked after the Krishna Yajur Veda, which has 86 shaka. Now, Vaishampayana's disciple was a chap called Yajnavalkya, and we have discussed him on a few occasions. So Yajnavalkya, you need to go and do some Puranic reading about what happened between Vaishampayana and Yajnavalkya. But basically, Yajnavalkya develops another portion of the Yajur Veda called Shukla Yajur Veda, and that has got 15 branches. Now, the same Veda Vyasa gave to Jaimini, another Rishi, Samaveda. Now, Samaveda is a huge Veda group. It's got about 1,000 branches, 1,000 sub-branches. Yeah, so that is the Samaveda that Jaimini was looking after. And then Sumantu Rishi was Atharvana Veda, who sub-branches was 12. So if you add up 24, 86, 15,000 and 12, it's about 1,037. So those were the number of branches that were available at the end of the Dwapara Yuga or early Kali Yuga. That you are talking about some 5,000 years ago. Now, what has happened over the last 5,000 years? Now, as you know, and we dealt with this last week, Vedas are also called Shrutis. Shruti is you say something and you hear and then you transmit. So it is transmitted by way of hearing. And that's how it has been for thousands of years. Now, over the last several hundred years, if not a few thousand years, the situation in Bharatvarsha has become so bad that it is our own fault. Much of these branches of the Vedas are now lost. So what is available at this point is just a handful, and it's quite a depressing situation. So you might say there are about 14 to 15, 12 to 14 shakas that are still prevalent in India, that are still preserving that portions of the Vedas. So what does it mean with regards to the number of verses that are currently available? So totally there are about 20,416 verses of the whole of the Vedas that are currently available, yeah, down from the end of Dwapara Yuga to as of 2020. Now, Rig Veda has got the maximum number of verses, about 10,589. Some scholars say 10,580 and so on. And then some, Atharva Veda is around 6,000, and then around 2,000 for Yajus and Sama Veda. So there's a total of 20,000 verses. Now, these 20,000 verses that are available, now, if you take Rig Veda, for example, 10,589 verses, and how have they been divided within the Vedas itself? So you have what is called the Samhita portion, which is all the mantra portions. Then you have Brahmana portions, then Aranyaka portions, and the Upanishads portions. So let's spend a minute or so to try and understand what these various portions are. So the Brahmana, the Samhita portions are all the mantras. The Riks, for example, they're all the Riks or the verses or Samhita portions. Now Brahmana means, the word Brahmana means Brahma and Ana. Brahma, we discussed this before. Another name for Vedas is also called Brahma. Brahma is another name for Vedas. And we also discussed 3 or 4 weeks ago how in the Vedic Sanskrit, the word Brahma has got various meanings. It can mean Chaturmukha Brahma, it could mean Vishnu himself, it could mean Mahalakshmi, it could mean the jivas that have been liberated in moksha. So they are all Brahmas. And also we discussed how the Vedas are also called Brahma. And I also told you about a cow, a species of cow in America and Mexico, which actually I was reading recently about this. A group of cows from India were actually sent to North America. And that particular group of cows are also called Brahman cows. Yeah. So there are various meanings for Brahmana. So here what it means is Brahma means further expansions of the Vedas is called Brahmana. Then you have the Aranyaka portion. The Aranyaka portion is when somebody has been a Grahastha and then he says, I've had enough. I've collected my wealth and I've made a lot of wealth and I've got children. My children have grown up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass on all my inheritance to my kids and I'm going to go into the forest and I'm going to spend a life of retirement in deep contemplation of the Supreme. So husband and wives, you to go to the forest. So Aranyaka means forest. So the Aranya means forest. So that group of text that people used, that is their portions of the Vedas in the forest, is called the Aranyaka. And the tail end or the portions of the Vedas that are currently available that discuss more on the philosophical aspects, and essentially it is a summary of all that has been discussed in Samhita, Brahmana and Aranyaka, forms the Upanishads. So that is the grand classification of the Vedas that I think we need to know, because we are going to be spending the next 3 to 4 weeks talking about Vedic riks and verses. So this is how the overall structure of the Vedas is. So now if we move on to the next slide. So now if you go to Rig Veda Samhita, yeah, so Rig Veda Samhita, I'm sure some of you might have read, will be reading Rig Veda Samhitas. How is the Rig Veda itself classified? So we said it's got about 10,580 or 10,599 riks or verses. So the whole of Rig Veda, how it is classified is there are 2 different ways of classifying it. The most popular ways of classifying it is what is called mandala. Mandala means books. So the whole Rig Veda Samhita has got 10 books. So they're called 10 mandalas. Okay. Now in each book, like any book, you will have sections. So those sections are called anuvakas. And within each section, you will have a set of suktas. Suktas are hymns. And each sukta will have a set of verses or riks. So that is how the work is, the Rig Veda is arranged. So you start out with Rig Veda Samhita, then you have mandala, then you have anuvaka, then you have sukta, then within the suktas you have the riks. So I hope you get the point as where I'm getting at. So Purusha Sukta, for example, is in one particular mandala, and it has got so many verses. Yeah. Now this is interesting. So all the mandalas, the 10 mandalas that I was talking about, each mandala, as I said, it's got a lot of suktas. Suktas are hymns. Hymns were seen by whom? Last week we discussed about hymns. Vedic hymns were not composed. They were discovered. They were discovered by the rishis in deep contemplation. Yeah. So those rishis who have seen those mantras or hymns have gone into what is called as the suktas. These are collection of verses that the rishis have discovered that have gone into individual suktas. Now, the 10 books again has got 10 rishis. They've got specific names. And now the names of these mandalas itself is very interesting. Now, if you go to Aitareya Upanishad, for example, the second adhyaya of Aitareya Upanishad discusses about each mandala and each rishi and what is their names, what is the significance, and so on. It's quite interesting. So if you look at the first mandala, it is called Satarshi Mandala. Satarshi Mandala means this mandala has got rishis who have seen verses up to 100. So that is why it's called Shata. Okay? Rishis who have seen up to 100 riks. They have discovered up to 100 riks, for example. All those rishis are there in this mandala. They're called Satarshi Mandala. Then there's called Gritsmada Mandala, Vishwamitra Mandala. We all know who Vishwamitra is. Vamadeva Mandala is the fourth. Then you have Atri Mandala, Bharadwaja, that's a common name these days. Bharadwaja Mandala is the sixth book of the Rig Veda. Then you have Vasishta Mandala, Pragata Mandala. Ninth Mandala is very important. It's called Pavamanya Mandala. And the 10th one is called Shudra Mandala / Mahashukta Mandala. So what that means is the 10th Mandala has got, so if you see the footnotes there in the PowerPoint slide, so Shudra Sukta Mandala means these are suktas that have less than 7 riks, 7 verses, or Mahashukta Mandala means they have more than 7 riks. Yeah. So to summarize how the structure of the Rig Veda is, you have suktas, and if you count the number of suktas, you have 1028 suktas. Over this 1028 suktas, you have 10,580 verses. And if you look at the words in the Rig Veda, you have 153,826 words. And if you look at the aksharas, the individual letters, there are 432,000 individual letters in the Rig Veda. Now you might ask, why bother and go into all these details? I'm going to ask a question just to wake you all up. So what does the number 432,000 remind you of? Any takers?
Number of years in the Kali Yuga.
Wonderful. Perfect answer. So that is the number of years in the number of human years in Kali Yuga is 432,000 years. And Rig Veda Akshara is 432,000. Yeah, so that's an interesting link. So now coming back to where we are. So we are still in the Rig Veda. So if you go to the next slide, Abhijit. So we're still in the Rig Veda. Now I've told you about all these mandalas and books and anuvakas and suktas and rigs. Now the Rig Veda itself has got two branches. There's something called Bhaskala and Shakalya. Yeah. The Bhaskala branch of Rig Veda, much of this has been lost over the last couple of 1,000 years, 3,000 years, it's gone. The only thing that is currently available is a portion of the Aitareya Aranyaka, and of course this great Upanishad called the Aitareya Upanishad. It's also called Maha Aitareya Upanishad, that's still available. Then in the Shakalya, much of the Rig Veda that we have at this point has been preserved through the Shakalya branch, and Kaushitaki Upanishad is one of the key Upanishads within the Shakalya. So whatever Rig Veda that we have preserved over the last 1,000 years, they all come from the Shakalya branch. I just thought it's an interesting information to be aware of. So if you move to the next slide. So now, before we approach the Purusha Sukta, of course, we also need to have an understanding of what Chandas means in the Vedas, particularly in the Rig Veda Samhita, where you have all these mantras, they're all set in certain orders and so on. So you need to have some background information before we tackle the Purusha Sukta itself. Yeah. So just to remind, so let's do the Simhavalokana Nyaya. That means like how a lion looks back in the jungle of all the animals that are there, like that. Let's look back and just revise what we have learned so far. We said There was infinite Vedas. Then there was all these 4 branches. Then there are 1037 sub-branches. Many of them have lost. There are about 20,000 plus verses that are currently available. Rig Veda has got about 10,500 or so verses. So these are the key messages from what we have discussed so far. Now the science and philosophy of the Vedas gets very interesting, because these are not just random words and text and ideas that have been compiled together in a text. Every sentence, every rik or the verse within the Vedas, they have all been arranged. There are a lot of numerology, there are a lot of mathematics in this. You might have read about Vedic mathematics and so on. So that Sankhya, that mathematics pervades the entire Vedas, not just the mathematics that we discussed last week about how in Shatapatha Brahmana there is a calculation of the pi, how trigonometry is there in Shatapatha Brahmana and so on. So that is one aspect of mathematics that's available in the Vedas. But you also have an entirely another set of mathematics in the Vedic science, which is each verse has got a specific number of letters, and that itself has got some philosophical significance. So that number of letters in a particular sentence is generally what is called as chandas. Okay? So that is the basic definition of chandas, is the number of letters in a verse. So there are 7 key chandas in Vedas. So there are lots of other chandas, but these are the 7 main ones. Gayatri, you might have heard about Gayatri. So Gayatri chandas, Ushnik, Anushtup, Brihati, Pankti, Trishtup, Jagati, and so these are the 7 chandas. So these guys, Gayatri, for example, Gayatri chandas means 24 letters. When I say Tat Savituhu Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonaha Prachodayat. So when I say that verse, basically what it means is there are 24 letters in that verse. Check it out. Just count the number of Sanskrit letters. I know some of you guys are doing Sanskrit class. That's wonderful. So check the number of letters in Gayatri Mantra. So that is 24. So that is Gayatri Chandas. Yeah. So 3 padas of 8 letters makes the Gayatri Chandas. So similarly, Ushnik is, so if you add 4 to each, so you start off with 24, add 4, that is 28, that becomes 32, 36, 40, 44, and 48. So these are the basic chandas of Vedic meters, as it's called when you read the Vedic mantras. Now, 2 things that you probably need to know is Anushtup. So Anushtup is 32. So remember that 32 is Anushtup. Gayatri is 24. Because much of the Vedas are in either Gayatri Chandas or Anushtup Chandas. There are some portions of the Vedas in Brihati Chandas. You might have heard about a very famous work within the Rig Veda called Brihati Sahasra. Yeah, so that's a very popular hymn of the Rig Veda where Vishwamitra recited that in a fire sacrifice when Indra was the Yajamana in Devaloka, and there is a wonderful Rig Vedic hymn called the Brihati Sahasra. Yeah, so that's Brihati, 36,000. That work is called 36,000 verses, but the Chandas has got 36 letters. Yeah, Trishtup, remember Trishtup 44. So for today's discussion, you probably need to remember Anushtup, yeah, which is 32, and Trishtup, which is 44. Now I'm going to ask a question here again to wake up some of you. Which Chandas is predominantly prevalent in Bhagavad Gita?
Anushtup.
Anushtup.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah, excellent. So Anushtup is the prevalent chandas in Gita, in Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. So now, once we have understood chandas, these are all the various letters. Next, what we need to understand is, because last week, as you remember, last week, as you know, we discussed about how the rishis saw it, and each rishi, each mantra has got a devata in it, and so on and so forth. So whenever you look at a particular mantra, even before you recite a particular mantra, it is customary, and in fact it is mandatory, acknowledge the rishi who has discovered this mantra. That makes sense. It's almost like an IP. So you have a patent on this mantra, and you say this is a rishi who has discovered the mantra, and then you say this is the devata for this mantra, and then you say this is the chandas for this mantra. So this is how you should start before you recite any mantra in any Ved. So if you take Agni Sukta, so Agni Sukta is, so who is, Agni Sukta comes in which Ved? Any takers, please. Who's going to answer? Agni Suktam comes in which Veda? Rig, Yajur, Sama, Atharvana.
Which one is which
Rig
one?
Veda?
Rig Veda.
Yeah, it comes in Rig Veda, excellent. And you will also be surprised that it also comes in other Vedas, particularly in Sama Veda. Yeah, because Sama Veda is a compilation of Rig and Yajus set in music. So components of Rig and Yajus also will be there in Sama Veda. So it comes in both in, you're right, it comes in Rig Veda and it also comes in Sama Veda. So Agni Sukta is the very first Sukta of Rig Veda. Yeah. Now, who is the Rishi? So I'm just giving it to you as an example as to how you look at it. So Agni Sukta, before you say Agni Mile Purohidam Yajnasya Devam Rukvidam, before even you say that, you have to say Madhuchanda Vaishwamitraha is the Rishi, Agni is the Devata, and Gayatri is the Chandas. Yeah, so that is the tradition. Now, Madhuchanda Vaishwamitra. So who is Madhuchanda Vaishwamitraha? Anybody? Any answer? Any takers for this question, please? This is interesting. Who is Madhuchanda Vaishwamitraha? No? So he is Vishwamitra's son. So Vishwamitra's son is called Madhuchanda Vaishwamitraha. Yeah, he is the seer of the very first Sukta of Rig Veda, which celebrates Agni, fire. What did his father do, Vishwamitra? He wrote the Gayatri mantra. Yeah, he is the seer of the Vishwamitra Gayatri, which celebrates the same. So Agni is Agni Narayana, but his father wrote about the Surya, who is in the sun. Yeah, so there is a link in that. So Madhuchanda Vaishwamitra, Agnihi Gayatri. So having spent the last 30 minutes about the basics of Vedas, now we are going to be entering into the Purusha Sukta. Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, now I'm showing you where the Purusha Sukta is actually placed. Purusha Sukta is part of the 10th mandala, okay, and it is the 90th Suktam of the 10th mandala. So if you go to the next slide, now the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda is quite interesting. There are 3 suktas in the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, and these are very, very important and very popular suktas that some of us recite this regularly. Now, Purusha Sukta is one, Ambrini Sukta or Devi Sukta is another one, and then you have the Nasadi Sukta. Yeah. So all these 3 suktas, I have actually taken a few verses over the last 12 weeks when we discussed various philosophical concepts around creation and so on. I have actually taken some of these verses from these various sukta. The reason being, these suktas are full of philosophical thoughts. Yeah. So Purusha Sukta, 90th sukta of the 10th mandala. Ambrini or Devi Sukta is the 125th sukta of 10th mandala. Nasadiya Sukta is 129th sukta of the 10th mandala. Who are the rishis? And I've shown it for you there. Narayanaha Rishi, Purushaha Devata, Anushtup for the first 15 verses, and the 16th verse in Trishtup Chandas. And for Ambrini Sukta, Vagambruni, Atma, Trishtup, whereas the second one is in Jagati Chandas. Then for Nasadiya Sukta, the rishi is Prajapatihi, Parameshti, Bhavavruttama is the Devata, and it's set in Trishtup. So Trishtup, how many letters are there in Trishtup? Anybody want to answer that quiz? Just to check whether you remember that.
11.
3 slides ago, I told you about.
Was it
It's
64?
44.
11.
Sorry?
44.
11 letters.
No, 44. 44 is correct. Very good. And Anushtup?
32. 32.
Very good. So Sudarshan, I'm glad you're listening. Wonderful. I'll
Thank
send you chocolates. So Anushtup is 32 and Trishtup is 44. Yeah, the 7 you're right, in the sense the 7 is the different types of chandas. But the number of letters, Anushtup is 32, Trishtup is 44. Yeah. So Purusha Sukta is set in 2 chandas. The first 15 mantras are in Anushtup. The 16th mantra is in Trishtup in Rig Veda. Okay. So this is now we are diving into the 10th mandala. We started off somewhere and now we are focusing into the 10th mandala. So let's go to the next slide. Now, this is a key slide that you need to take on board. The reason being, why is there so much fuss about Purusha Sukta? Almost all of us should know Purusha Sukta, and most of us would have heard Purusha Sukta. So can somebody tell me where they have heard somebody reciting Purusha Sukta? Some of you may be doing it at home, but can I have some examples of where you heard Purusha Sukta, please?
Satyanarayana Puja, they do Purusha Suktam.
Yeah.
And most of the pujas we do, the priest recites Purusha Sukta.
Yeah. What about in Balaji temple, for example?
We have not gone there much. We go there for puja at that time and come,
Yeah. Anybody else want
In puja
During processions, during the god processions, Utsavam.
Utsavams? Yeah.
And also all the pujas at the end, the mantra pushpa, Om Yajnene Yajnyam Ajayanta Devaha.
Correct, yeah. So that is also given. Yeah, thank you very much for that contribution. So what I've heard is so far that this mantra is recited at home when they do Satyanarayana Puja. Then it is also recited in the temples and any form of worship. Purusha Sukta is recited. I have a slide in 2 or 3 slides as to where it is recited and so on. But I think you captured most of the key information there. Now, why do people do that? Why do they do that? The reason being, I think it was about 3 months ago when we did a session on Om, the significance of Om. Perhaps maybe I introduced that concept there. So there is a work called Rig Bhashyam, so that Madhvacharya wrote. So Rig Bhashyam is a commentary on Rig Veda. So there are you can count the number of acharyas who have done commentaries on Rig Veda. So you have there's a guy called Sayana who did a commentary. Then there is a guy called Madhvacharya. He did a commentary on Rig Veda. And following him, there have been 1 or 2 other individuals who have done commentaries on Rig Veda. So in Rig Bhashyam, Madhvacharya basically summarizes why Purusha Sukta is very important. He says, Om Ashesha Gunodara iti Narayano apyaso Purno Bhutivaro Ananta Sukho Yad Vyahriti Ritaha Gunais Tataha Prasavita Varaniyo Gunonatehe Bharati Jnana Rupatvad Bhargo Dhyeyo Akhilair Janaihi Prerako Asesha Buddhinam Sa Gayatri Arthairitaha Sapurnatvad Puman Nama Paurishe Shukta Iritaha Sa Eva Akila Vedartaha Sarva Shastrartha Evacha. So that is how he actually starts his commentary on the first 40 suktas of the Rig Veda. And he says this is the preeminent position of the Purusha Sukta. So what have I said so far? So if you look at the top panel, you have the word Om. So what did our guide, the Brahman, the supreme Brahman, also called as a Purusha or Narayana or Vishnu or whatever, what did he do around the time of creation? He basically initiated the transformation of the Mula Prakriti to form various vikaras of matter. So creation of material things happen, and at the same time he recites Om, and then he actually goes on to say Om Atataha. So he says Om. Okay, what is that Om? That Om is, and again we discussed that 3 months ago as to how it expands. It is not just a single word. It's got various components. You can have 3 components. You can have 4 components. You've got 8 components of Om. But essentially the gist there is Om expands into A, U, and M. Om. Now that is what you call Pranava. Pranava. Now that becomes Vyahriti. What is the Vyahriti? Bhur, Bhuvaha, Suvaha. Now that expands and becomes the first pada of Gayatri. Okay. The second pada of the Gayatri is Bhuvaha, and the third pada of Gayatri is Suvaha. Now the first pada of Gayatri expands into the first varga of Purusha Sukta. The second pada of Gayatri becomes the second varga of Purusha Sukta. And the third varga of Purusha Sukta is the expansion of third pada of Gayatri. Now, each pada of Purusha Sukta then expands into the whole of the Vedas. It becomes Padya. Padya means poetry, which is Rig Veda. Gadya means prose, which is Yajur Veda. Then Gana means music, which is Sama Veda. And then these Vedas, then they expand into various sounds. So essentially the concept there is Purusha Sukta is the quintessence of the Vedic philosophy. And it is also the expansion. If you want to understand what is the meaning of Om or the Vyahriti or Gayatri, you need to also go into the Purusha Sukta, because every chapter in every section of the Purusha Sukta is a celebration of the corresponding aspects of Om. So an Om is the most sacred syllable in Sanatana Dharma. And we dealt with this quite extensively over the last few classes. And that is the reason why Purusha Sukta is so important for us. Because in every form of worship, be it at home, be it you're doing Saligrama Abhisheka, or you're doing Satyanarayana Puja, or any form of temple worship, will start with the Purusha Sukta, because it is the quintessence. It is all that is there. The whole, if for example, as I told you, there are 1,000+ suktas. Not all of us can read thousands of suktas, let alone reading one sukta is itself complicated. How are we going to tackle 1,000+ suktas? So if you can't spend time reading many suktas, at least one sukta of the Rig Veda in our life, when we are alive for 70 to 100 years, at least we should make an attempt to understand at least one sukta of the Vedas. And if you want to understand one sukta, the one that you have to choose is the Purusha Sukta, because that is the essence of the Vedas. Yeah. So that is why you do Purusha Sukta. So if you go to the next slide, so again, I've put the structure here. So Purusha Sukta. Now, the importance of Purusha Sukta is, although it is celebrated in the Rig Veda, where there are 16 verses in the 90th Sukta of the 10th Mandala of Rig Veda, most of you would be aware that Purusha Sukta is actually present in all the Vedas. That is another importance of why Purusha Sukta is important. It is not just confined within the Rig Veda, where it has got 16 verses. If you go to Yajur Veda, if you go to Taittiriya Aranyaka, there are 18 verses. If you go to Shatapatha Brahmana, which is the Shukla Yajur Veda, Vajashniya Samhita, you will have 18 verses plus 5 verses, you will have 23 verses. If you go to Sama Veda, the first 5 of the Rig Veda is set in music, so you have 5 verses. If you go to Atharvana Veda Samhita, you have 16 verses. So it is present in all the 4 Vedas, all the 4 Shakes. Purusha Sukta is there. So again, that gives you a sense that this thing must be quite important. This Sukta must be very important in Sanatana Dharma. Yeah. Now, you would also be surprised to know that there are 2 Upanishads that are out there, and their sole purpose is to give you an explanation of the philosophy of the Purusha Sukta. Yeah. So these are lesser known Upanishads, but if they are available, books are available. So if anybody is interested in understanding in great details about the Purusha Sukta, I would urge you to look at these 2 Upanishads. They're called Mudgala Upanishad and Shubala Upanishad. They all form the part of the Rig Veda family of Upanishads. And as you know, the other 2 Upanishads are Maha-Aitareya and Kaushita. So there is, as I said, there are 2 Upanishads that have made their sole purpose is to explain the Purusha Sukta. Okay. Now, in Mahabharata, Shanti Pariva, there is a verse. It says, Idam Purusha Suktam Sarva Vedeshu Patyate Ataha Shrutibhyaha Sarvebhyo Balavat Samudirita. That means, because it is there in all the Vedas, now we also understand that it is very strong. It's Balavat Samudiritam. So that means it is one of the most important and very strong sukta that we need to know, because it is there in the Vedas. Now, in Gita itself, what is 15th chapter? Somebody wants to tell me what 15th chapter is? What is the name of the 15th chapter?
Purushottama Yogam.
Purushottama Yoga. Who is going to volunteer and tell us the first verse of the Purushottama Yoga?
Is it starts with Urdhvamula Matasakam?
Urdhvamulam, yeah. Urdhvamulam Adashakam. Ashvattam Prahuravyayam. Chandansi Yasya Parnani. Ekam Veda tu Vedavid.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. So, Purushottama Yoga, for example, the 15th chapter, the name itself is Purushottama Yoga. That means Purusha Uttama Yoga. And if you look at Purushottama Yoga, how many verses are there in Purushottama Yoga? There are 20 verses. And in that 20 verses, and we have discussed this before, and maybe God willing, at some point we can do chapter 15. So chapter 15. So again, there is a saying which goes, if you can't read the whole of the Vedas, at least read Mahabharata. If you can't read the Mahabharata, at least read Bhagavad Gita. If you can't read the whole of Bhagavad Gita, at least read chapter 15. Yeah, so that is the saying. So at least read chapter 15 because there are 18 verses. There are 18 verses are the key verses of chapter 15. And the last two verses are phala verses. They just tell you about what are the benefits of knowing the 18 verses. So now you can understand where I'm getting at. I put a question mark there. I've said why 16, why 18, and why 5. So these numbers are not there in random. Some Rishi has not just set it because he just thought that it will be there. The 16 numbers, 18 numbers, 5, they got significance. And as I said before, in Vedic literature, numbers are very important. So we have done this on a few occasions. So before I turn on to the next slide, I just want to ask some of you, if somebody could tell me why these numbers, please. What is the significance of the number 16?
Is it like Jada, like us?
Sorry, Chitra?
Yeah, it's like, like us being the Atmas and stuff. Is it Jada or?
Yeah, you said about the Lakshmi
15,
being the
16,
17th,
yeah.
18th is a god, like that.
Correct. Wonderful. Yes. Brilliant. Brilliant answer. So that's what 16 is. It's called Shodasha Kala Purushaha. Yeah. Shodasha Kala Purushaha is a key concept of the Vedas and the Upanishads. It is the 6th question of the Prashna Upanishad where this Rishi asks Pippala the Rishi, who is the Shodasha Kala Purushaha? And then he explains who is the Shodasha Kala Purushaha. The 16th. So basically the 16th, you're right, Chitra. The 16th one is the Jiva, and the Jiva has got 15 fences. And pervading all these 16 components is the supreme being who controls all this. So he is called as the Shodasha Kala Purushaha. So that is the reason why Rig Veda has got 16 verses, because it celebrates the Shodasha Kala Purushaha in those 16 verses. What about number 18?
That's including the Brahman and the Lakshmi.
Correct. Brilliant. So 18. So 16 is Jiva, 15 are the fences of the Jivas, 17 is Lakshmi, 18 is Vishnu. So Yajurveda is set in 18 verses because of that. So is the reason why in Purushottama Yoga of chapter 15, Vedavyasa has set those 18 verses in chapter 15 because those 18 verses celebrate whom? The whole of 18 verses celebrate the Purushottama. The Vishnu is what is celebrated in that chapter 15. What about 5? Why is 5 in Samaveda, for example?
Rudras?
Okay. Yeah, can you expand on that a bit more, Sudarshan?
Is it because of Shiva being the knowledge and... am I right? I don't know. Shiva is the knowledge, isn't it? Like he's the knowledge of... controller of knowledge or something.
Okay.
Shiva?
So yeah. So Shiva is.
He also has 5 faces, isn't it? Gayatri Devi.
Yeah. So I've heard Gayatri now.
It
Now
could be 5 components of mind. So the buddhi, the
let's not forget,
separate thing that happens straight from Rudra.
Okay, so just to remind you, we are dealing with Purusha Sukta and we are talking about 16th is Jiva, 17th is Lakshmi, and 18th is Vishnu. So I like those 5 numbers as to how you have linked up with the Pancha Tanmatras, the Pancha Bhutas, the 5 components of the mind, how Ahankara Tattva, the body of which is Shiva's body, and how that divides into Vaikarika, Tejasa, and Tamasa, and how you have all these 5s. So that's very true. That number 5 is important in that context. But what I'm asking you here is the number 5. Why is it important in this context where you're talking about Jiva, Lakshmi, Vishnu, and all that? 5. So 5 are the 5 forms of Vishnu. What are the 5 forms of Vishnu that we are all aware of, quite familiar with? Aniruddha, Pradyumna, Sankarshana, Vasudeva, and Narayana. So those are the 5 key forms of the Supreme Lord, Vishnu, that is celebrated in all the Vedas and the Puranas and the Itihasas, the 5 forms of the Supreme. So the 5 here corresponds to the 5 forms of the Supreme. So as you can see, all these numbers now, they all kind of add up as to how they go and celebrate the Purusha Sukta. So now, next slide. So this is the slide that you have all answered this already. So the 17, 18 and the 16, why Purusha Sukta has got all this, you've answered this. Now there is on the right, I've summarized what's called Shaunaka's Rig Vidana. So as I said, initially I asked you a question as to where have you heard Purusha Sukta being recited and so on. Okay. Now, Purusha Sukta is a key component of Vishnu worship. Vishnu can be worshipped in 6 bases. He can be worshipped in water, in fire, in our own heart, or in the solar orb, or as an icon. Icon, I mean as a vigraha. So these are the 6 ways in which Vishnu can be worshipped. Yeah. Now, nyasa, some of us may be doing nyasas in the sense that once you've had a bath, before you do a worship, you have to touch 16 components of your body, and each component you say Purusha Sukta, 1 mantra, before you are ready to do the puja. So that is called nyasa, where you say 16 rigs. Then there is something called Shodasha Upachara. Shodasha Upachara means 16 steps for worship. So if you go to a temple, or if you have an authentic Purohit who comes home and does your Satyanarayana puja, watch him next time, because when he does the worship, when he sets the pedestal and keeps the vigraha and does all this, he will be doing it in 16 stages. And every stage, he will recite one of the mantras of Purusha Sukta. So that is called Shodasha Upachara. Then when you do fire sacrifice, when you do homas, there is various setups that is done during the homas, the fire worship. And again, each mantra is it corresponds to individual steps in the homas. And the Shastras also say that there are 10 benefits of Purusha Sukta. So you can do your research and identify what those benefits are. And if you feel that you need those benefits, then I would strongly urge you to start thinking about Purusha Sukta very seriously. So these are all the basic background informations about Purusha Sukta. Okay. Now moving on to the next slide. Now we are going into the Purusha Sukta proper. So I am not sure how much time I'm going to have. Although there are 16 verses, my intention here is not even to, I'm hoping at least I'll touch the first verse. Because what I'm trying to do today is prepare the groundwork before we tackle the Purusha Sukta in great detail and depth. Yeah. So the first question that we should always ask is, so what is the very word Purusha Sukta actually means? Yeah. So I'm going to ask some of you to contribute there. So do any of you have any ideas as to what Purusha means, what Sukta means?
Purusha means it's just a cosmic being, all-encompassing being.
Okay. Thank you, Sridhar. Yeah. Anybody else?
Generally means man, isn't it?
Generally means man. In Tamil, Purushan means husband. Yes, man.
Yeah, man. And I think if you say like, Purusha is, maybe in this context, it means Brahman as well.
Vishnu, isn't it? Purusha means...
Hello. Purusha.
Yeah.
Purusha has many meanings.
Vishnu.
Vishwarupa, I think.
Yeah, Purusha could be
okay, yes,
male or female. It's equal. Purna means which has reached the full evolution, top of the evolution, and also of course Vishnu and Narayana.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So there are quite a lot of
became more of a. Sorry, I thought Purusha became more of an abstract concept rather than referring to a person or Vishnu. I may be wrong on that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for all the contributions, because you captured lots of ideas already, which I was planning to illustrate. So now, just going back to the word Purusha. So as I said, Sanskrit, particularly Vedic Sanskrit, is through and through etymological. So every word in Sanskrit, as I've said before, it should be broken down. It should be split, opened up, and then you see the meanings of those words, very similar to the Kabbalah interpretations in Jewish tradition or Christian tradition. You should open those and then have a look at what the meaning is. So the word Purusha basically comes from the etymological origins of Purushas are very many. And here I've listed only I think I've listed 9. There are more to it. So first one is Purvameva Aham. Purvameva Aham means the one that is all that was there before creation. Okay, he is called Purusha. Pura Asa becomes Purusha. Okay, Purishete. This is important. Purishete means, what is Puri? When I say Puri means what? Puri means a place. Yeah, in India there are lots of towns with Puram, Kanji Puram. Yeah, that comes from the Puri word. Puram means a place. Puri means a place. Shete means he who is inside a place. So this body is a place. Who is inside this body? There is a first entity who is inside this body, who is called Jiva. So Jiva is called Kshara Purusha, if you remember chapter 15 of Gita. Who is inside the Jiva? The Supreme Being himself. So that which is inside the Jiva is also called Purusha. So he is also called Purushete. So in the highest sense, the one that is inside the Jiva and that which is inside the whole of creation is Purusha. So Purushete. Then you have Puru Saha. Saha Purush. Saha Puru means the one that has infinite qualities and attributes. Puru Syati. Syati means Nasha. Yeah, destruction. So the one that destroys the universe, which is a Pura, which is a place, and it destroys the universe. So this is one of the definitions of the Supreme. So that is why he is also called Purusha. Puru Sanoti. Sanoti means he who gives the Purusharthas. What are the 4 Purusharthas for us? Anybody wants to contribute there, please? Purusharthas. What are the 4 Purusharthas?
Karma, Artha, Kama, Moksha.
Correct. So who gives us all these 4? That guy is Purusha. Then you can split Purusha into Pu, Ru and Sha. Pu means it indicates Pavitra. Ru means Rautiti to Ruhu. That means he gave Vedas to Chaturmukha Brahma. Then Sha means he is the one who's inside all the beings and controls them. Now Purusha Vidatvat Purushaha means the one that needs to be known for our salvation. Then you have the last one called Purna Shadgunatvat Purushaha, which means that he who has infinite auspicious attributes is called Purushaha. So these 9 ways of etymology of Purusha just gives you an idea of what is the Vedas actually telling us when we use the word Purusha. Now, Sudarshan mentioned a concept of Purusha as a male. Now, the original Sanskrit, Purusha never meant a male or a female. It is somebody who is in a place, a Jiva in a place. So that Jiva can be in different bodies. So all the Jivas were called Purusha. There is no male or female Purushas. So there is no male or Purusha does not mean a male. Yeah. Jivas, that is different. Whether there is male Jivas and female Jivas, that is entirely different discussion. But Purusha does not mean a male in original Sanskrit. Down the years, somehow that Purusha has become Purushan, has become a husband. Yeah, so that is one meaning. But Purusha actually means the Supreme, anybody who is inside a body. But it is the Supreme who is inside all bodies. We are inside only one body, but that guy is inside all the bodies. So he's called Purusha. Sukta means, let's keep it simple for lack of time. Sukta means that which celebrates, or a hymn that praises the Purusha is called Purusha Sukta. Is called Sukta. So now we understand the Purusha Sukta means that collection of riks that praise this Purusha is called Purusha Sukta. So if you move to the next slide, now the word Purusha also comes in the Upanishads. It comes in the Upanishads quite a lot. Say in Prashna Upanishad, it says, Etasma Jivaganat Paratvaram Purusham Purishayam Purusham Ikshate. So this is interesting. Purishayam Purusham Ikshate. That means this Jiva who is also called Purusha, he has to see the Purusha who is inside him. So that is it. That is our aim. So that's what Prashna Upanishad says. Purushayam Purusham Ikshate. Isha Upanishad say, Ya asau asau Purushaha so ahamasmi. Yeah. And Brihadaranyaka Upanishad also brings Upanishad, it talks about Purusha quite a lot. Here is Anunarayana Upanishad and Shatapada Brahmana, which actually gives you a definition who it is. Om ata Purusho havai Narayanaha akamayat praja surajayeti. Anunarayana Upanishad gives a definition. Who is this Purusha? Ata Purusho havai Narayanaha. Purusha of the Vedas is Narayana only. Is Anunarayana Upanishad's conclusion, and the same is the conclusion of Shatapatha Brahmanam of Shukla Yajurveda. It says Purushoha Narayano Akamayati. It's very similar to Anunarayana Upanishad. So these Upanishads are telling us that this Purusha is Narayana himself. Yeah. And in Katha Upanishad, the Purusha comes in various verses. You know, we have touched upon this before. And in lack of time, I don't want to go into this, but the Upanishad then says, Tad Vishnoho Paramam Padam. So that Purusha is that Vishnu himself, who is the supreme, whose abode that we should seek to reach. Yeah. So that is the various Purusha word that comes in Upanishads. Watch that next time when you read Upanishads, you will see these Purusha words used quite often. Moving on to the next slide. Now, I think I'm not going to have time. I think maybe I'll spend another 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then we'll close and continue the next week. Now, here is another slide, which actually then gives you an idea. Brahman that we discussed is celebrated as Purusha in the Vedas, and that Purusha is Narayana, who is Vishnu himself. Now, the reason why this conclusion is important because, as I said, you should look at the words in Sanskrit and etymologically split it open. And I've told this before to all of us here and other places. This word Narayana, Vishnu, these are all not sectarian words at all. These are not sectarian words. These are words that give us an idea of the quality of the person who has that name. It just gives us those attributes of that person. So if you take Brahman, it comes from the root word called brih. Brih means brihantohi asmin gunaha, which means that which has pervaded. Where has it pervaded? It has pervaded in time, it has pervaded in space, and it has pervaded in gunas. That one that is pervaded, infinite pervasion in time, always exists. Infinite pervasion in space, it exists elsewhere. Infinite pervasion in guna means it's got infinite attributes. That is called Brahman. If you look at Purusha, I told you about Purusha as Purna Shat Gunatvat. The one that has infinite attributes is Purusha. Now, if you take the word Narayana, that is also very interesting. We can split Narayana in so many ways, but I'm just going to take two. One is Nara and Ayana. Nara means water. Ayana means he who is on the cosmic waters in Pralaya. That is Narayana. Very easy. Now, Ara means defects. Na Ara means no defects. So he is the abode of no defects, which means what? No doshas. And the opposite of that is what? He's got all the gunas. So again, Narayana also means that being who's got all the gunas. If you go to Vishnu, for example, the word Vishnu comes from the root called Vishal Vyapta. Vishal Vyapta means that which is pervaded everywhere. Vish means to pervade, to enter, to occupy. So this guy has pervaded everywhere. Now, if you look at Vishnu, Vishanu, Aitareya Aranika gives a definition. Shakaro Balam, Nakaro Prana Atma. V is Vilakshana, Vishishtata, so extraordinary. So this is an extraordinary being who is inside everything and motivates everything. Yeah. So these are all some of the meanings of Narayana, Vishnu, Purusha and Brahman. So the conclusion there is Purusha Sukta is actually Vishnu Sukta. It is actually the celebration of the Supreme Lord called, who goes by the name. He's got infinite names. One of the names is Vishnu, which implies that which has pervaded everywhere. Yeah. So Purusha Sukta is Vishnu Sukta. So that was my intention of putting this slide. So the next slide is, so this is the overall structure of the Purusha Sukta. So now we have all understood where Purusha Sukta is and what is the significance, what is the meaning of Purusha Sukta, whom is it started celebrating. So now we need to know what this Purusha Sukta actually has. And I said there are 16 or 18 verses depending on which Veda you look at. I have taken 18 because I want to capture all the information from both Rig Veda and Atharvana Veda, for example. So it is divided into Varga 1, Varga 2 and Varga 3. Now, before, let's see if we have time to deal with the first mantra, but what I want to share with you is, I want to play the audio file for the first two Varga alone. So let's listen to the first two Varga of the Purusha Sukta and see whether we can take the very first verse and spend some time talking about it. And when we do the first verse, if I run out of time, I would request Sudarshan to remind me, please. Yeah, so give me 2 minutes, I'll play the first Varga of the audio. सहस्रशीर्षा पुरुषः सहस्राक्ष सहस्रपाद स भूमिं विश्वतो भूत्वा अत्यतिष्ठद्दशाङ्गुलम् पुरुषयेवेतगुं सर्वम् यद्भूतं यच्च भव्यम् भूतामृतत्तस्येशानः यतर्नेनाधिरोहति एतावानस्य महिमा अथोऽध्यायागुंश्च पूरुषः पादोऽस्य विश्वभूतानि कृपातस्य मृतं दिवि कृपाधूर्ध्वबुधे पुरुषः पादोऽस्येह बभात् पुनः तथो विश्वं व्यक्रामते शासनानसनेहपि तस्मात् विराडजायत विराजो अधिपुरुषः स जातो अत्यरिच्यत पश्चाद्गो विमथो पुरः. Okay, so that was the first varga that I have played. Did you guys like it?
Yeah, good boss.
Have you all gone into a
Trance. Yes.
So so this is the first varga of the Purusha Sukta, and it's, I mean, I have to say, every word, every letter there is so beautiful. And some of us, I recite it every day. There's not a single day where I don't recite it. And when I do puja, I recite it. I don't do anything else. I just recite this. It's so beautiful those mantras are. So let's see whether we can at least touch upon, at least let's scratch the surface of the first mantra. And I would be able to hopefully to illustrate over the next 10 minutes the deep philosophy of the Purusha Sukta. This is not just some sentimental worship. This is not some ritualistic worship of the Supreme Being. This is the words of the Purusha Sukta is a celebration of the Supreme Being, the greatest Supreme Being that all religions of the world have accepted, that there is one Father, that there is one Supreme Omniscient Being who is the creator of this universe. And the Rigveda, Purusha Sukta, basically celebrates this person. And the very first verse of Purusha Sukta is quite magical. It basically summarizes who this Purusha is. It says that being who is omniscient, who is omnipresent, and who is omnipotent, he is that Purusha. That is what this, so Abhijit, next slide. So that is what this particular very first verse actually summarizes. It says, Om Sahasra Shirisha Purushaha, Sahasra Akshaha, Sahasra Pad, Sabhumim Vishwato Vritva, Atyatishtat Dasangulam. So let's see if we can tackle this. We have spent some time before talking about this. So hopefully the first line, I'll be able to go through it quite quickly. So Purushaha, we know who Purushaha is, the meaning of the letter, word Purusha, the one that is inside the universe, controlling everything is Purusha. Sahasraha means, Sahasra means what? In colloquial language, Sahasra means 1,000. Vishnu Sahasranamam. So it's got 1,000. But is that the meaning of the Vedic Sanskrit? Is that what this Rishi has seen? So by the way, who is going to tell me who is the Rishi for Purusha Sukta? Who is the Rishi for Purusha Sukta?
Narayana.
Correct. So Narayana is the Rishi, Purusha is the Devata. And the first mantra is an Anushtup Chandas. Yeah? 32 words, letters. So Narayana Rishihi. Yeah? He is the one who has seen it. Now, he is saying Sahasraha. So what that Sahasraha means, 1,000 is a very colloquial sense. The deep philosophical meaning of Sahasra means, it's called Sahasaranat, Sahasarati. What that Sahasaranat or Sahasarati iti Sahasraha, which means that which remains with that particular person eternally. So when I say Sahasra Shirisha Purushaha means Sahasra Shirisha. Shirisha means head, face, head. So it says his head is always with him. his eyes are always with him. His legs are always with him. So what is that meaning there? For us, we have this material body. We have our face, we have our hands, and we have our legs. When this body falls down, we lose our head, hands, and legs, and we go and then we acquire another body. So we are Kshara Purushas. Yeah. But by saying Sahasra in the very first word of Purusha Sukta, he has actually captured what chapter 15 of Bhagavad Gita has said, Uttamaha Purushaha. He who has no body, who does not have a material body, that never falls down. So every component of his body is his eternally. So that is one meaning of Sahasaranat Sahasarati. Mudgala Upanishad, for example, will say Sahasra Shirsha Iti Attara Shabdo Ananta Vachakaha. That means in Aitareya, for example, there is a verse which says Dasha Dasha Tat Shatam Tat Sahasram Tat Sarvam, which means so it's thousands. That's what it means. Thousands of hands. He's got thousands of legs. Essentially, he's a upalakshana to say he's got infinite heads. He's got infinite hands. And that's what Mudgala Upanishad says. Shabdo Ananta Vachakaha. Ananta means infinite. So Sahasra means infinite. So then we understand, as you move down, he's got infinite heads, he's got infinite eyes, he's got infinite legs. What does that mean? So what is infinite? Head means what? Eyes means what? Legs means what? Now, over the last 12 weeks, we have done so much of these 24 tattvas that we are all expert on this. So legs means it's one of the karma indriyas. Yeah, it's a karma indriya. Eye is a jnana indriya. Head is where all the major indriyas are there. But more importantly, it is a mind. Mind is in the head. So that corresponds to the legs means what? You can move. You move with legs. If you have infinite legs, which means you move infinitely everywhere simultaneously. So that gives you an idea of omnipresence of the Supreme. Eyes means it's a jnana indriya. Eyes is an indriya of knowledge. So the more eyes you have, the more knowledge you get. So this guy has got infinite eyes, which means that he's got infinite knowledge. So he's omniscient. Now head is where the Icha Shakti is. So he is so potent that he can do whatever he wants. So that infinite head gives you an idea of omnipotence of the Supreme. And so this is the key word. Sahasra Shirisha, Sahasraksha, Sahasrapad instantly gives you the omnipotence, the omniscience, and the omnipresence of the God, which is the central concept of all religions of the world. Yeah. And we all know that Rig Veda is the oldest scripture of mankind. And some of us would say it is eternal, but the modern scholars would say they have an origin of 2500 BC thereabouts. We'll give it to them. You can have it. But still, if you take that, our concept of God is 2,500 years, dare I say 3,000 years more ancient than any of the other philosophies of the world, where we celebrate the Supreme as the omnipotent, omniscient, and the omnipresent being. Now, that is the key meaning for the first line. Yeah. Now, in chapter 11, the Vishwarupa Adhyaya, Arjuna was actually witnessing this. Yeah, Rigveda was giving what the Narayana Rishi had seen in his deep meditation. But actually, chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita, actually Arjuna actually witnessed this. And you all know that 11th chapter, Aneka Bahur Udaram Vaktra Netram Pashyami Tvam Sarvato Anantarupam Na Antaha Na Madhyam Na Punas Adim Pashyami Vishweshwara Vishwarupa. And he is quite scared and he talks about this. Arjuna is talking about this. Basically, it is the same first line of the Rig Veda is what Arjuna is actually witnessing. Yeah. So the omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence is a key concept of the Supreme Being. And if you go to the next line, so my question there, this will be an interesting discussion, and I hope you'll all contribute to this. So yes, fine, he's omnipresent, he's all pervasive. Sridhar was talking about this all-encompassing being who is all pervasive. So here is my question: if Brahman is all pervasive, how can he have a form? If something is all pervasive and infinite, how can he have a form? Okay, so this is one of the major attacks of the Sanatana Dharma. This is one of the major onslaughts that we hear about talking about how can the Supreme have a form if he is infinite. Our friends in the Catholic faith will say, yeah, we also accept that God is omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. But how can you accept that this one has got forms? He is so infinite. Don't go too far. Go to our own Vedic scriptures. If you go to Dayanand Saraswati of Arya Samaj, he has a similar argument. He would say space is all pervasive. Space does not have a form. Similarly, God is all pervasive. God does not have a form. That is his conclusion from Vedas of the Arya Samaj sect. Now, the reason why they give that is having a form is a limitation. God cannot have a form because he is limitless. That is the argument. So what is the view with the audience here? So we are actually combining our discussion and the class. So what is the view here? Can an infinite being have a form? What is your take?
Okay, Madhu, I have, these questions have come several times before in all our discussions. I have a very simple view. He is omnipotent, so he can do that. If he cannot do that, he cannot be omnipotent.
That is the perfect answer. Yeah. So that is the perfect answer. And that is the reason, Sudarshan, thank you very much. That is the reason to tell our friends, including our friends in the Arya Samaj, as to why we followers of the Sanatana Dharma or the Vedas actually feel that the Supreme has a form. Because our Rigveda Purusha Sukta has said, Sahasrapath. He has said he is Sahasrapath, and he is Sahasra Akshaha, and more importantly, Sahasra Shirshaha. He is all potent, he is omnipotent. So the argument there is, if I have an infinite being who is infinitely omnipotent, will he not have the potency to attain a limited form? Is the question. So our view would be, he is omnipotent, he is capable of doing anything. So although he is infinite, he is also capable of acquiring a finite form. And that is because the evidence of this is in the Purusha Sukta. So this is where we go to our evidence and say, that is why we believe the Supreme Being has a form. Now, that takes you to the next concept of Nirakara and Sakara. Yeah, so the same slide. So, Abhijit, you have to move to the next slide. So yeah, so when you have the omnipotence and form, then the question comes, is he Nirakara or Sakara? There's all these people battle around this in various discussions. Nirakara means he's got no form. Sakara means he's got form. Where is the confusion here? If as Sudarshan said, he's omnipotent and he has a form, the answer there is he's Nirakara, yes, because he doesn't have material form, because he's not made of matter. But he's Sakara because he's got a non-material form. He may not have a material form, but he's got a non-material form. That is why he is Sakara. So we say our Brahman is Nirakara and also Sakara for this reason. But he is not Nirakara because he is a Nirguna Brahman. So that concept actually falls down in that discussion. So when you take Ishavasya Upanishad, it says Ishavasyam idam sarvam. It says he is pervaded everywhere. Okay, so Taittiriya Upanishad is the answer for this also. When God creates, what did he do? So akamayat bahusyam prajayeti. We have discussed this before. Satapo atapyata, satapas taptva, idam sarvam asrujata, yadiram kincha tat shrishva tadeva anupravishata. So he creates and he also pervades and goes into everything. That is the greatness of the Supreme. So he is pervaded into every aspect of the universe. So if I have a Vigraha, I will still worship him as something who is pervaded into the Vigraha. In Gita chapter 9, there is a very famous verse. That is also an answer for this. It says, Maya tatam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina. This is the same answer Krishna is given. Maya tatam idam sarvam. Tatam means I pervaded everywhere. Where? In the Jagat. So the question is, if he is all pervasive, how can he have a form? Krishna himself has had answered that. Avyakta murtina. Murti means what? Form. Avyakta means in a very unmanifested form, which means a non-material form is what my form is. So that is a direct answer to that question. So if you move to the next slide. So as I want to say, in Exodus, for example, this is a famous verse from the Bible. And I want to take this up because Exodus will say, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above or on earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, is what Exodus says. So this is a key verse in the Bible where our friends would look down upon us because we are the so-called idolaters or idol worshippers, which is quite a inflammatory comment to pass. But this is prevailing in the society at this point. not because they have not understood properly. The problem is ours. We have created this problem because we have not made an effort to actually inform our Catholic and other friends, look, this is what our Vedas say. And we are also not idol worshippers. Our Vedavyasa, the great Vedavyasa, who is Narayana's incarnation himself, he wrote a sutra that I want to remind you in Brahmasutra. In the 4th Adhyaya, first chapter, 4th verse, he said, Na pratike nahi saha. Okay. So here is Vedavyasa himself categorically saying, Na pratike. Pratika means what? Symbol. Symbol means it can be any symbols. Na pratike nahi saha. He said, symbols should not be understood as identical with God, but the Lord should be contemplated as present in the symbol. Why is that the case? You should go to Rig Veda. There is a famous verse in Rig Veda which describes how does God creates the universe. God's creation and the creation of a pot by the potter are slightly different. If you look at a potter, he's sitting outside his creation and he's using the Mula Prakriti, which is the mud, and then he is making the pot and he's keeping the pot outside. So for a potter, whatever he creates them and the pot is outside him. But for our Supreme Brahman or the Purusha, that is not how he creates, as described in the Taittiriya Upanishad. He creates his universe and he also gets inside it. Tat Srishtva Tadeva Anupravishat. Why does he pervade his creation? So that he gives them the reality and the ability to function, ability to become the objecthood of knowledge. So that is the Vedic philosophical view, that everything in the universe is pervaded by this being, which actually gives things a reality. So when Vyasa said na pratike nahi saha, we of course understand and agree with our Christian friends and other friends. Yes, we are not idolaters. We would also not agree with you, but please understand, when we do that, we are actually contemplating on the supreme being who has pervaded every component of the universe. And that is why we use the vigrahas or deities to do worship. Yeah. So moving on to the next slide. So this is the concept of cosmic Antaryamin. And we discussed this before in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, talking about the cosmic Antaryamin and how he is every component of the universe. There are 23 beautiful verses in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad that Yajnavalkya answers these questions. So we need to remind ourselves of this cosmic Antaryamin. Moving on to the next slide, Abhijit, again, we should remind ourselves of the previous sessions that we have had, as how there are these three components and then they have different types of creations. Jivas has a creation, it comes down in bodies. Brahman has a creation, in the sense it comes down as avatars, various avatars. And there are various types of avatars of Supreme Being. He comes down. And of course, matter has got its own creation. It undergoes various transformations and assumes forms. And we would say there are various forms. Our Supreme Being has various forms. Chapter 4, 9th verse. Janma karma cha me divyam. Evam yo veti tattvataha. Tyaktva deham punarjanma na yeti mameti. So Arjuna. He says, my janmas, the form in which I come down is a divine form. He who knows this completely, he will be eligible for moksha, is what Krishna says for us in Bhagavad Gita. Yeah. So moving on to the final section. So the last line of this, let's not forget. So far we have discussed, we are still in the first verse of Purusha Sukta that is generating so many discussions and philosophical concepts. So the second line of the first verse is Sabhuvim Vishwato Vritva Atyadishtat Dasangulam. So Sa means this Purusha, Saha means this Purusha. Bhumim, what is Bhumim meaning? Bhumi means, we all know what Bhumi is. Bhumi is this earth. So you have to extrapolate that concept. So it's Atra Bhavanti iti Bhutani. That means that from which everything came. So Brahmanda is from which every material universe basically evolved in the Brahmanda, the 24 tattvas that I have listed for you. We've discussed this so many times. So that is the Bhumim. So that is the Brahmanda. So that is also called Prakriti. Now, who is the Abhimani Devata of that Prakriti? Who is going to answer? Who is the Abhimani Devata of Prakriti?
Lakshmi.
Absolutely. So, Shri Tattva. So, Lakshmi is also called Shri Tattva. So, they are called Bhumis. Yeah. Bhumim Vishwataha. So, Shri Tattva pervades the entire creation, so does the Supreme Being also pervades the entire universe. But his pervasion is far beyond the pervasion of Lakshmi. So it says Vrutva. Vrutva means beyond. Yeah. So Bhumim Atihi. That means the next word, if you go there, Sabhumim Vishwato Vrutva Ati Atishta Dasangulam. So Ati means, so one of the other things I need to inform you here is when you look at a Vedic mantras, the words are not set in serial order. You will have to pick words from different places in the same sentence and then join them together to get the meaning. So here, Bhumim Ati means that which is beyond Bhumi. We have just said Bhumi. Shri Tattva is also called Bhumi. So that which is beyond the Shri Tattva. Again, chapter 15, we've read this before. Dvaimo Purusho Loke, Kshara Akshara Evacha, Kshara Sarvani Bhutani, Kutastaho Akshara Uchyate, Uttamaha Purushastva Anyaha Paramatma iti Udavrata. So basically, Krishna is also confirming what Purusha Sukta is saying, that I am superior to this Lakshmi entity. I am superior to it. So that is the meaning of Bhumim Atihi. So finally, the last concept there is transcendence. So previous slide, it basically said that I have pervaded everything. So Abhijit, you need to move to the next slide. So immanence of the Purusha is actually said in the first half of this. Sabhumim Vishwato Vrutva. Okay, that talks about the immanence of the Purusha. Immanence is that concept of complete pervasion in his creation. But the key there is, he is not only pervaded his entire creation, but he is also pervaded beyond his creation. So beyond his material creation is his transcendental area. Even there he is pervaded everywhere. Is the sense of the next word when it says Atyatishta Dasangulam. So if you go to the next slide, Abhijit. So what that means is Dashangulam Ati Atishta. So Mudgala Upanishad will say Ananta Yojanam Praha Dashangula Vachaha Tata. That means Dasha means 10. Angulam means breath, finger breadth is angulam. In our olden times, our inch was equivalent to the finger breadth. So it says 10 finger breadths means there, it's a upalakshana. So that means it is infinitely beyond the material creation. So the idea there is, although the Supreme has pervaded the material universe, he is infinitely beyond it, and he is also infinitely pervaded beyond the material universe. Yeah. So this particular concept of the transcendence of the Supreme is captured by this particular word, Atyadishta Dasangulam. Now, you may also be familiar with, there is another sukta called Narayana Sukta in Yajurveda. Yeah. There it summarizes, it comes in Taittiriya Aranyaka, where it says, Antar Bahishta Tat Sarvam Vyapya Narayanaha Stitaha. Yeah. Who is this Narayana? Antaha. He is inside me. Bahishta. He is also outside me. He is inside the Pindanda. He is outside the Pindanda. He is also inside the Brahmanda, and he is also outside the Brahmanda. So those are all the ideas that you get, that he is all pervasive. Now coming back to Dashangulam, you will find it quite interesting. Why did the Narayana Rishi there put Dasangulam of 10 finger breadths? So if you start using 10 fingers from your navel, if you put 10 finger breadths, you'll reach your heart. And then from there, if you put 10 finger breadths, you'll reach your neck. And from there, if you put 10 finger breadths, you'll reach your right eye. Now, why are these important? Because you have 3 key chakras there. Anahata chakra, Vishuddha chakra, and Agnya chakra. So these are the 3 states of consciousness that we have discussed before. The wakeful state, the dream state, and the deep sleep. And the Supreme Being is present in every stages of our consciousness. So again, to remind us of this greatness of the Supreme Being, that he is not only pervaded the entire universe, he is also inside you, and he's pervaded you, and he's also making you operate in your 3 states of consciousness when you're alive in this world. So that is the sense of Atyadishta Dasangulam. So I'm going to conclude there to say there are lots of points in the very first verse, and mind you, there are 15 more verses to go, and hopefully we should be able to tackle more philosophical concepts. So there's nothing that I knew that I've discussed today, because we have actually spent over the last 12 weeks of dealing with this concept, and it's really heartening and very pleasing to know that we are all contributing to this, because we have already grasped quite a few concepts before. So in conclusion, Purusha Sukta is the most celebrated Vedic mantra. And one message that you would want to take from me today is, Brahman equals Purusha equals Narayana equals Vishnu. And that the very first rik of the Purusha Sukta describes the Supreme Person as omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and immanent and transcendent. So it has given this entity 5 qualities to start with. That 5 qualities essentially encompasses everything that is possible in the Supreme Being. So I was going to remind all of us to say that the Purusha that is celebrated in the Rig Veda is a Purusha with infinite auspicious attributes. He is not a being who is nirguna. He is not a being without qualities. We should always keep that in mind when we read the Rig Veda and Purusha Sukta. So I'll finish there. Krishna Pranamastu. Maybe we can have some discussions afterwards. Thank you for listening, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Madhu. Wonderful lecture again. Yeah, anybody got questions, please?
Yeah, I have one question. Madhuji, like you said, I also used to, Purusha Suktam I used to sing every day, but I felt that bhava is not there inside. That feeling for God. So I stopped reading all the things because I felt I'm doing it automatically, you see.
Yeah, I think I see where you mean. I kind of empathize with you to some extent on that, because the hope is by doing these sessions on Purusha Sukta over the next 4 weeks, we can all remind ourselves of, see, when you recite the first line, for example, and if you're going to decide that I'm going to start reciting Purusha Sukta from tomorrow, and when you recite the first line, it'll be wonderful if you actually remind yourself that when I recite the first line, I'm actually thinking about this greatness of the Supreme Being, these 5 qualities that are summarized in that verse. So I think once we get into the meaning and then enjoy that verse, then doing Purusha Sukta recitation doesn't become a ritual or a habit. It actually comes from deep within. So I think this is something that we should all do, that all of us are prone for this. Yes, I agree.
So is it better to do only one Purusha Suktam? Because I used to do maybe many. So Sri Suktam, then Ganesha, one day Rudram, Namakam, Chamakam, all I used to do long. Maybe it looks long ago. It looks long ago, but because of this bhava,
that's very impressive that you're able to recite all the suktams. If there is one that you want to just hold on, because this Purusha Sukta is the Purushottama Yoga of chapter 15. And if we are all so fond of Lord Krishna, then we just hold on to that.
Okay, thank you. It's easier also for us, isn't it? Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, please?
Madhu, I have got a question. Sridhar here.
Hi.
The Purusha Sukta is, as you said, is very celebrated part, but also it's been the target for people who attack Hinduism without knowing the deep meaning and understanding of some of the verses which refers to the differences of the creation, and it's been twisted and turned, and obviously we are living with that now. So it's often people who don't understand that attack this, and even from day-to-day life, when I talk about Hinduism to some people, non-Hindus, they just immediately jump to say, "Oh, this is even said in Rig Veda. How do you defend it?" I do the best to my ability, but what is your take on that?
So I think the Purusha Sukta, yes, there are some very important verses in Purusha Sukta. The one that has caught up controversy is the verse 13. Brahmano syasya mukhamasi bahur rajanyah kritaha uru tadasya yad vaishyaha padbyam shudro ajayata. So that particular verse, the 13th verse of Purusha Sukta, has got a lot of controversy, saying that this is the whole reason for caste divide in our society and all the problems. I would actually submit that is far from truth. It just reflects the poor understanding and ignorance of people who read the Rig Veda or the Purusha Sukta. What this Rig Veda is saying is entirely different compared to what it has been made to be. Yeah, so that is there. Ignorance is the biggest enemy here, and ignorance is on both sides, Sridhar. One is the other group being ignorant is forgivable, because they are not part of the Sanatana Dharma, and you can't expect them to actually know everything. So that is forgivable. What is unforgivable is we ourselves are not making the effort to know our Shastras, what they are saying, and we are not able to robustly defend it. So I think the argument goes both ways. So my answer to this would be, if somebody is asking those questions with the pure intention of challenging us, the best thing is to ignore them. Just tell them you don't have a good understanding of what it is. And if that person is willing to listen to you, then perhaps maybe you should go and explain to them in detail. But yeah, this is the challenge. The idol worship is a challenge, but I think we should all tell everybody that this is not what it is. Yeah.
Thank you very
Anybody
much.
has got any views on that?
Yeah, I think the only thing is, Madhu, and it also answers one of your previous slides. Only thing is, we all need to understand Hinduism is not an organized religion. So there is no pressure on us to get more people into our system. That is why we always speak the truth. Whereas Christianity and Islam, they are organized religions. And so they want more people, into their organization. So they will only say things which pleases other people. They want to bring, they can even make changes in order to do that. So that is why the issue with the Catholicism and everything, the issue comes there, because they have to make sure that their God is the only God, nobody else, so that sort of a slide you put where it makes sure that you should not worship any other God. So everything is made, or everything is sort of, you are directed towards that sort of a principle where you make sure that you don't worship any other God. Hinduism does not have such a pressure. Okay, so that is one of the reasons, which is positive side as well, sometimes can be negative, but that is one of the reasons we speak the truth, we speak what is universal truth. Okay, I think Kalai Selvi is here as well. I'll also tell her, one of the reason, many people think caste system is being occupation. It's not just occupation, it is about maintaining a tradition. Madhu said so many things about this branch of this shaka of this Yajurveda, Samaveda. So these are all given to, because who is going to, nobody can do it, like preserve it throughout their entire, lifetime. So it was given to different people, different rishis and their santadis, so that in that way, so it is more about maintaining tradition, not a caste. And this is not just about Vedas, this is about each and every aspect of an Indian culture, not just for Brahmins, it is for other people as well. So the issue comes is where people mistake caste as being an occupation. That's where the point comes, this all about, our system is about maintaining the tradition. That is where, like, we were doing all those things in order to, our life was based on all those in order to preserve the tradition. So I think if an ignorant person from West might see it as a caste system, as occupation, but we should not be doing that. Sorry, it took a long time.
Yeah, thank you, Sudarshan. That was quite well articulated. Thank you.
Madhu, you showed in the Exodus that it says God is jealous. How can God be jealous if he is perfect?
Okay. I will raise my hands and said I have not done the Kabbalah interpretation of that in detail. I just wanted to pick up some ideas. But what I'll do, Shushu, this, I will go back and look at that. But I just thought that was interesting as to why the missionaries take that very seriously. And they look down upon Sanatana Dharma based on that particular verse. I don't know what it means. How can God be jealous? I agree with you. I don't know. But there must be another interpretation to that. So before commenting on that, maybe I'll do some further research on that and ask him. But you're right. Yeah.
Madhu, just trivia. When I was reading about these things, a lot of references were mentioned about Zoroastrianism, especially with Purusha Sukta and this thing. Is that a descent? Is that something that came from Hinduism or their contemporary thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the Zoroastrian thing is quite interesting. I'll give you an example of, so Zoroastrianism is a very ancient faith. Yeah, it is a very, very ancient faith. And some of the languages that is used, some of the language used in Zoroastrianism is very similar. Okay, so now there is this very famous verse. I think we dealt with this at some point. So let's say Aham Brahma Asmi. Yeah, so there is this word called Asmi. Yeah, Asmi means as me. You can change it into as me. Yeah, as me is Asmi. Yeah. Now in Zoroastrianism, so in Zen Avesta, so that is their work. So Zen Avesta, there is a discussion, dialogue about what are the names of God. Okay, so they call their God as Ahmi, Ahmi. They call their name of their God is Ahmi. Yeah, so which comes from the Sanskrit word Asmi. So if you look at that language, wherever S is there, it is replaced by H. Yeah. So now, if you take Asura, okay, Asura in one form, Asura means demon, but Asura is also you can split Asura. So their god's name is called Ahura. Ahura is the name of their god, yeah, which is similar to Asura. Similarly, Ahmi and Asmi. So there are lots of similarities. So there is a language similarity, origins of words, and also some of the concepts have also come like that. Yeah, there is lots of those verses that are available that I can say. I just thought Asura and Ahmi are common ones that are used.
Thank you. That's interesting.
So again, it tells you, because the Vedic religion is so ancient and the concepts and philosophies are so ancient. And if you think about it, that Vedic concept about 5,000 or so years ago, when many of the people in the West were, I don't even know whether they were hunter-gatherers, but they were all there. They were all hunter-gatherers, probably running around naked. But 5,000 years ago, we had a highly organized society with deep philosophy. So there used to be travel. There used to be people who are coming and going. So there are lots of documentations of people from, if you go to Mahabharata, for example, Hunus, who are the Hunus? Hunus are from Hungary. So the Mahabharata war, the army, one of the armies that participated with the Kauravas was from Hungary. So from Hunus have also come down to Mahabharata. Around Mahabharata time, you had Hungarians coming down. So that is as far as the West. So there are lots of human, trade and relationship that was going on. As this was going on, much of the Vedic concepts and Vedic philosophies have been absorbed. Now, recently I took up an example of Adam and Eve and the apple. And I gave an example in Mundaka Upanishad where that story is actually explored in great detail. So people do pick up the ideas. Let's not hide under the blanket there. The people do grasp ideas and then develop their own philosophies. That's fine. As Sudarshan said, we are a very open and accommodating philosophy. People can come and take whatever ideas as long as it benefits their society. So it's very likely that there are many thoughts, some schools of thoughts that have evolved from Vedic culture.
Yeah, thank you.
And Mother Nandish, just another comment just to add to yours. The quantum people, so three of them, Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, and Heisenberg, they all kept referring to the Vedas to describe the concept. Even Nicholas Tesla, he used to say actually they assign a lot of their information to the Vedas. So that's so that speaks for itself.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we had a very interesting.
That's very nice to put on this.
Questions. We'll bring the session to a conclusion now. Do you want to give a hand to Madhu, please?
Thank you, Madhu. Thank you, Sudarshan. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madhuji.
Sudarshan,
Yeah.
we'll do four sessions on Purusha Sukta. So hopefully we'll all get a good overview of what it is. Yeah.
Sure.
4 sessions I think will be just about enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sudarshan, can I ask you a question? I heard that ladies can't do Gayatri and Purusha Suktam. That was also a reason why I stopped. Is it right? I mean,
You're asking Madhu, yeah, please.
no, I'm asking you also.
So I will go. Okay, I will go. Okay, I will go with what I have learned, what I have learned from my guru. He said, "This is crazy. This is a height of stupidity. Yeah, this is a celebration of the Supreme, who is inside all of us, and he is celebrating all of us. So why should we make these restrictions? I just don't understand who has come down with these restrictions. Certainly, the guru whom I have learned over the last 15 years is of the view that everybody needs to be aware of the philosophy and the knowledge and have the ability to recite and pray and so on. And again, that discussion about Ayyappa that came about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and again I feel that there does need to be some kind of reformation and some reform that needs to happen within our society. So let's not first, before criticizing others, let's look ourselves in the mirror and see what we are doing. Yeah, we can't be sitting in glass houses and commenting on others. So I think we need those kind of changes that need to happen. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what we were also, about
The
that. Ayyappa, we were
at the
talking.
end of the day, the lady is also a jiva. It needs to sort of move up as well. Like it needs to knowledge and everything. So it has to chant.
But
That
it's
jiva.
always said ladies are the weaker souls and weaker
No,
by body.
there's nothing like that. I'm sure you can do whatever we do.
Yes, no, that's all nonsense, auntie. There are so many rishis, Sachi, and there are some celebrated rishis in the Vedas. So this is all utter nonsense. So this is somehow down the line. I think this is politicians made.
And
So let's give the politicians the credit for that, not the true philosophers.
Okay.
Okay, Madhu. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, boss.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.